Okay, well, let's start this interview or this conversation. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to On the Sofa with yours truly, Esther Austin. And today with me, I am talking to Chris Jasper. And he's got a new album out called Raise the Bar. And it's got 8 distinct tracks on there. It is 8, isn't it, Chris?
Yes, it is.
Yes, yeah, 8 distinct tracks, and each one has their own sort of feel and groove. But there's also really they got some nice messages, all their individual messages behind this. But before we go any further, let's just find out, how is Chris Jasper feeling today?
I'm feeling pretty good, and it's a nice day, today, sunny, and everything's good.
Brilliant. Well, it's the sun has been beaten down in London. We're actually in the 30s today, which is unusual, but we're enjoying it all the same. So, Chris, you've got an album out called Raise the Bar, and there was one particular track where you have dedicated to your wife, Margie. Margie, called Hey Love. Now, so I'm going to start with that particular single, and then we can sort of dip into the others. And obviously your music is all about love. You're a balladeer, if you like that terminology. And so Hey Love, Margie and your son, is it Michael, are on that track as well. So just tell us a little bit more about the album as a whole, and then this particular track, Chris.
Well, yeah. I like to start with this track. It's a song, where the man is really expressing, coming out with all of his feelings. And, he's wondering if, the person he loves feels the same way. That's the concept, lyrically about the song. And I also want to put musically, a lot of the things that I've done before, maybe, synthesizers and all that, and kind of combine a lot of the sounds that I had been known from the past in this song. And a lot of people love this song. Everybody who hears it and plays it said they love it. So I'm very happy with how it's received.
And there's always a real honoring. I'm always not surprised, but it's a breath of fresh air listening to your music, because lots of songs, they talk about love, but you don't really feel it. But with you feel into the song, you feel into the music, and also the words. And it very much feels as if it's a lived experience rather than just someone just penning something about love and putting it out there. Does that make sense, Chris?
Yes, it does. And I always want to be honest when I present my music. If I'm talking about a love song, I want to be honest about it. If I'm talking about a message, I want my honest feelings to be behind it. So, that's where I'm coming from. I'm coming from in here.
You can feel it in your music, because then you've also got My Little Boy, Praising You, I Promise, and they are all different expressions of you, but there's a message in that. And also there's almost like a slightly rebellious one. What is that one called? We Are the People, We Are the Nation. And I can just see people walking down the road, with their fist up, but it's a fist of celebration as well, and coming together. Is that right?
It's a message of coming together, but also it's expressing, because sometimes people in leadership, sometimes ignore the voice of the people.
Yes.
And this song is the voice of the people saying, we are the people, we are the nation. You know what I mean? Pay attention to us, to pay attention to our thoughts, and our opinions. And basically what the song is.
So what triggered you to write that song? What was a particular situation for you penning that track, Chris?
Just the overall atmosphere, of what's going on, the overall picture. It seems like the people who govern are paying too much attention to themselves. You know what I mean? They need to turn that attention back to the people they are governing and see, what they want, what I mean? Listen to the people is what the song is saying. And I feel there's not enough of that going on.
Okay. And then you've got the title track, Raise the Bar. It's almost like, because there is a theme to the titles that you've chosen as well. So, you're asking them to listen to the people. And then this message seems to be to the people, raise the bar.
Right. Raise your expectations of yourself. Raise your goals, because if you shoot high enough, you're going to get, high enough. You're going to get higher. The higher you shoot, the better the result's going to be. And you'll improve as an individual, if you raise the expectations of yourself. That's what that's about. Raise the bar.
Excellent. And when was this album put together? Was it a COVID baby, or was this in production?
Part of it was, I Promise, I think was the first song I started writing, during the COVID period. And, I just wanted to give myself a little more time than usual, because sometimes I would come out with a song every year, or album every year. But I wanted to give myself a little bit more time and think about, what exactly it was I wanted to say in some of the songs. And, it came about over like maybe a year and a half. That's when I completed, the whole album.
Okay. And that first track that you're talking about, is called The Way You Love Me. And that's another wonderful ballad. That's very mellow. Just share a little bit more about that. What is that particular track saying, Chris?
That's like, turn down the lights, have a person that you really care about and express, how you feel about them. That's what that song is about. And I wanted to be intimate like that. I didn't want too much instrumentation going on. I just wanted to make it really intimate sounding, and so you pay attention to the lyric, pay attention to the atmosphere that's being created, the ambiance that's being created, and I use the synthesizers a lot in this song, sort of reminiscent of Highways of My Life and Lover's Eve, that I did a long time ago, that was like synthesizer heavy, and just to create a mood,
And you're very good at creating that mood, even after all this time, you're still able to create a mood, because, I was going back to some of your former years and the stuff that you did then, and the theme has just grown. Is that making sense, Chris? There's never been a dip in, there's this whole balladeer that you are, and the songs that you're producing.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because the title to this album is really personal to me. That's how I feel about myself. Raise the bar.
Yes.
Try to improve. Never be satisfied with where you are at the present.
Absolutely.
And that's my personal message. That's how I feel. So that's why I've been, through the years, able to keep writing. And, this is my 17th solo album. And so I just keep trying to say, what else can I do? How else can I approach this subject or this type of song? Raise the Bar is an example. Okay, when I first started to write Raise the Bar, I said, okay, I want it to be funky.
Yes.
I also want there to be a point in the song where the funk even gets better. It gets more funky. So I raise the bar within the song. You know what I mean? So that's how I feel about myself. I want to keep improving.
And that's really good, because then whatever you stand for, then that would reflect out from you as well. And they always talk about being in the same environment. That's the environment that you're going to grow in. And so even through not just your immediate family, but even through those who listen to your music, hopefully people can listen to it and think, this is different, even though there is that sort of Isley thread that runs throughout your music, because we know this is a Chris Jasper's track, because there is that sound in the background, but then you can just hear the sort of nuances and the slight changes. And for me, you're all the work that you've done over the years, and it's been consistent, it's been regular, for you to keep going and keep raising the bar. That's incredible, because you're just evolving. You're allowing yourself to evolve. And that's what it is about, evolving and not remaining static.
Yeah, to me, that's what composition is. Composition is never stagnant. You know what I mean? It shouldn't be, because the composer always is trying to look for, like I said, different ways to do things, trying to maybe approach a theme a little differently. Like see if you listen to some of my intros, they have versions of themes that you're going to hear later in the song.
Okay.
That's a compositional tool, that composers often use. And I go back to those things that I've, learned in studying music. And I think that's the reason I can keep my music moving, because I'm looking for another avenue. It's another way to go. Can like, okay, I did For the Love of You this way, and then Sensuality that way, and then maybe I'll try another direction. A musical direction. And I always start with the music. That's one thing. I always start with the music, because the music, I think, is your transport. That's your vehicle. Now, the melody and the lyric, those are the things that, you start driving that transport, you know what I mean?
Okay.
So it always starts though with that basic track.
Excellent. And also another funky one on the album is I Love Rhythm and Blues. That's got a real funk. And it's interesting because when that one starts off, it just goes into a different place, because I remember it started off and then I thought, oh, it's got even funkier. So you mentioned about how you sort of take it on that sort of trajectory, and that's what I found with that particular track. And also Raise the Bar, I put down, because I've just got some little notes here, funky, but there's a message. It's about being a messenger. My Little Boy, very sentimental, very mellow, very poignant. And then The Way You Love, I've loved The Way You Love Me, because I've interviewed you around that track before, but that's also like a bit like Hey Love, very mellow, very sentimental, very, very seductive, subtly seductive. And then you've also got Praising You, which obviously it speaks for itself. That's an honoring track.
Right.
That's a speaking into the lives of, on that real soul level type of track. And then I Promise. Tell me a bit about I Promise.
I Promise is that's the song, that could be a wedding song, actually, because you're just, reassuring the one you love that you'll always be there for them. And that, I feel that's important. That's a very important part of a relationship,
Yes.
Being consistent, being there, no matter good times, bad times, I'll always be there for you. I mean, that's it. I promise. And I promise I'll always. And, I think the second verse talks about, that dedication is supported by the ring that he gives her. So that's the message. That's a good message for marriage, I feel.
Excellent. And you worked with Hey You, like I said, you had the vocals of your family on there, your wife and your son. What was it like working together on that particular project?
Well, it's always great working with your family, because it's just unique, to have your son there and your wife there, they were there on We Are the People, there's some of the voices on there of them. Michael's there on Raise the Bar, he's there. And Mike also helps me do some of the rhythm tracks too.
Okay.
I get his input, on doing those rhythm tracks to make them sound maybe a little bit more current, sometimes. But he's my technical guy too. So they're here in the studio with me a lot, and it's just really great.
And Chris, as a whole, the album as a whole, what is the message? I mean, we spoke about the tracks individually, and we spoke about the sentiments and what they mean, but as a track as a whole, what is the album saying to your audience?
It's saying what the title says, actually. try to improve, and that's what I wanted every song to reflect, is maybe improving on a ballad, because Hey Love goes through verses, and it goes through a bridge, and then it comes to that tag, which is totally different than the rest of the song. Say you love me, girl. That part, that whoa, whoa, that's totally different than the rest of the song. And that kind of raises the bar for the ballad. You see?
Okay.
And see, and then that song, it could be an anthem. We are the people, we're the nation. That raises the bar for the message. You see, if you look in every song, it raises the bar for whatever message that is. That's what I wanted this album to be. I promise. Raises the bar for commitment. You see, I'll always be there for you. You see, in every single song, I spent all of my life praising you. You see, that raises the bar for the gospel. For your spirituality. That's what I wanted this album, each song to reflect part of that title in some way.
Brilliant. And what can we expect from Chris? Because, every time I interview you or talk to you, you've produced something new and something different. And obviously that's part of raising the bar. So if I may be cheeky enough to ask, what's next if you're, after this particular album?
Well, I'm gonna take a bit of time to kind of just reflect, because that's what I do when I finish an album. I kind of just, sit back and, all right, reflect, do promotion, do interviews like I'm doing now, and try to take the album as far as I can. But creatively, I don't know. That's something I can't control. I might have an idea tomorrow, about a song, and I'm back down here, working on it. So, I'm gonna keep writing. I'm gonna keep producing, as long as I can, as long as God, gives me the inspiration to do it. I'm going to do it because that's what I love. That's what I grew up doing is trying to be a composer, a songwriter, that was my thing. And so ever since a kid, I wanted to do it. And it's just a thing that I was blessed enough to have, that ability to write and to produce my own music. So I'm going to keep going.
And you said since a kid, so I said I'm going to wind down. I promise. But you said since a kid. Now, when did you realize? At what age, Chris, did you realize that this was what you wanted to do with your life?
I think I was around 7 years old, and I was taking piano lessons. And my professor, my piano teacher, was a professor, and he was very good. He taught me a lot about composition. But I remember sitting there, and my feet was barely touching the pedals, with piano. He had this big baby grand in his living room, not baby grand, but the grand. And I'm sitting there, reaching the pedal, and I'm looking up at the music, and I said to him, I said, I want to be like them, the people who have their name on the music. He said, you want to be a composer? And I said, yeah. And so he said, well, you're going to have to do a lot of work. You're going to have to, do a lot of studying. You know, learn how to write for other instruments and blah, 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 And I said, oh, I don't care. So ever since then, he started, teaching me, about composition and how composers would write their pieces. And when I graduated high school, I had like a head start, on a lot of students when I went to Juilliard because I had been studying composition a long time. And so it was a big help to me. Realizing that at that age, I don't know. I was always an older kid,
Yes. There's a discipline. I can see there's a discipline that you have as well. A real discipline about you. Not easily distracted, and that really comes through when you speak. So I guess because even at the age of 7 and knowing what you want and having that discipline to do whatever it takes, that's a gift in itself for a young person.
Yeah, I always felt that way, that I knew what I wanted to do, and I was very determined. I was a very determined kid, and what if I set my mind to do something, I did it. And I always believe, if I give someone my word, I'm going to keep it.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Yeah. If I tell somebody I'm going to do something, that's what's going to happen. I'm not going to, be shaky, and I'm not that type of person. And I've always been that way, and I think that's one thing that kept me straight. What I mean? I had some core things that my mother taught me, and I never lost them, and I'm just happy that she taught me those things.
Brilliant.
She's the one who wanted to take piano lessons in the first place. She saw me playing by ear. She said, you should learn how to read music. I said, okay, I'll do it, because she knew the professor that went to our church, and she set it up, and I did it. And
here you are, as they say, here you are, raising the bar with your new album. See how it all sort of flowed in. Brilliant, brilliant. And I'd just like to also say a huge thank you to Chris from SoulTracks for connecting me with you. He's a really invaluable source of promotion, and just wishing you all the best with your track. And the last thing I do promise, Chris, what else would you share with your audience that would sort of further compound what you've already said?
Oh, I don't know. I do want them to know that, I am truly thankful that, how they have received my music throughout my career, through, the stages of my career too, I really appreciate that. And I get a chance to tell people that too, now that, over the internet and Facebook and, Instagram and all that, I can actually express to them, because that wasn't there before, and I could never do it, but now I can.
Okay.
I really appreciate the support that everyone's given me, in media as well. It'd be very kind.
Because you bring out music that now we really need. Because you're going back to basics, you're going back to the heart, you're going back to the soul, and I feel that's what people are really reaching out for, that authentic sound, not just the authentic sound, but the authenticness in the music and also in the words, because words are powerful, words are power, and you're speaking into our lives, you're speaking love and all these wonderful, yummy things into our life. So that's really powerful, Chris. So I'd like to say thank you once again for taking time out to talk to me, wishing you all the best with your album, and I will check in on you in a few months' time to see what you're up to.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.